and curious.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Unholy and Curious podcast. I am your host, Teddy Quinlivan, and today I have the beautiful Alexandria with me. And one thing that you should both know about us before we start this episode is that we are both binary trans women, which means that we're both transgender, but we transitioned from one binary gender, the gender that we were born, to the opposite gender. So I was born male, but I transitioned to being female and living my life completely as female and being recognized in society as female. And so has Alexandria. Correct?
Correct. Yes, correct. Correct. I am a cis spirit binary woman trapped in what is seen as a binary man's body. But I am all women, though. I'm in an equilibrium of state of happiness, of how I want to be expressed and seen in society.
Yeah. So actually, one last thing before we completely take off on this. I wanted to have Alexandria on because we are both trans women who are just sort of living our lives in sort of the typical trans experience. My experience is a little different than yours in the way that I transitioned at quite a young age, and you transitioned into adulthood.
Yeah, I transitioned what you would call transitioning late.
Yeah. And now we both sort of live our lives as trans women. I am no medical expert. Neither are you.
No.
We are not, full-blown gender experts either. I wanted to do this episode with another trans girl who sort of experienced being trans the same way I do, because I feel like a lot of times our voices are sort of left out of the conversation to sometimes more radical voices or people who devote their lives to discussing these things. So I sort of wanted it to just be like a little bit like tranny talk, tranny cocktails. We're just going to be discussing sort of like what's going on within the trans world, trans legislation, the way that trans people are perceived by society. I wanted to cover all of these topics. And so that's what we're going to do now on this podcast. So please just know that we are not experts. We are just two stupid whores expressing our opinions.
Sharing our real-time experience, actually living as trans women.
Yeah, exactly.
We're not stuck in a room obsessing over this. We're actually out living our lives day to day.
Yeah, exactly. So I think like a great place to start would sort of be like, maybe you take me through a little bit of your journey with your transition.
Well, my journey began when I think my earliest memory of it wasn't like a question of, oh, am I a boy or a girl? It was more so, I'm a girl. And so I've always known this and conceptualized this. But during the period that I knew this, being trans wasn't really mainstream, or there wasn't a lot of information. Like it was almost like an impossible dream for me. And to survive, as a human being, we try to survive. I tried to assimilate as much as I could. So I lived my life, I want to say, I've always been trans, but I was trying to convince myself to being a cis heteronormative boy for a long period of time of my school years. And then I embarked on a journey of maybe possibly being gay. And then I found myself dressing up again and kind of like forgetting how I got there and realizing how I got into this place of like, oh my God, like I forgot, like I literally tried to assimilate. So it was almost like method acting for me, I would say.
Yeah.
Like I kind of got lost.
Performing the gender that you were born as.
Yes. While trying to survive. I was like really miserable. Like it really affected me to this day. Like,
understandably.
Like I have so many anxieties I didn't even know that I had until like I started taking Lexapro, and I was like, oh my God, like this is weird. Like, is this how I'm supposed to feel as a normal human?
Yeah.
And it was like all the trauma of like being told, that you shouldn't be existing, or that you're just like defected and kind of ostracized often from even saying who you are. Like literally people are telling us who we are without even being us, which is so bizarre.
Yeah, it's kind of irritating that everybody sort of has an opinion about trans people and the validity of their experience and the validity of how they truly feel and identify as. And these people, with all due respect to them, have no fucking clue what they're talking about.
No clue at all.
Because being transgender is something you can only describe and only experience if you've lived that experience. I mean, similar to like I empathize with the struggles of people of color. I am never going to understand what it is like to be a person of color.
Yeah, and nor can we speak on their behalf.
Yeah, exactly. All I can do is be supportive of the way that they feel. And I feel like that's sort of been lost on society because we are such a fringe, marginalized group of people that, it sort of was, to me, it was like as soon as we gained gay acceptance and that became very mainstream, trans acceptance was obviously the thing that would follow. But this has been a very challenging uphill battle. And if you pay attention to any bills or legislation that's being passed and sort of the discourse around trans people, in some ways, even though we're more visible now than we ever have been, it's gotten more challenging for us. Would you agree?
No, I agree. Like now, like I remember growing up, it was one thing feeling kind of excluded and kind of like a pariah from my classmates and my teachers and some family members. But now the government, like now it's a felony. Like it's just the trauma that these kids are going to experience beyond just saying, oh, my family or they have opinions. But now like it's like a law, like the literally government is going invading your home, telling your parents how to raise you. Like how like not even your own parents that love you and try to support you, they can't even do anything now. Like that's even worse. Like I can't even imagine what these kids are going through. Like I had the struggle that I went through. It's just the repercussions that are going to occur. I don't even it breaks my heart. Like absolutely, it breaks my heart. Just knowing that like as a my inner trans child is crushed. Like
yeah, same. And I was so fortunate that I was able to receive medical care when I came out because I was 16 years old, and at the time I had never met a trans person, didn't even know what transgender was. And then I was just super, super fortunate that I lived in a state that had Boston Children's Hospital had a trans program. And I was very fortunate that my parents my mom was accepting of me and did everything in her power to get me into that program. And I actually wasn't able to get into it because there was such a strong volume of trans kids, and it was really the only program in the country at that time. And I just had to go through such great lengths to, pursue transitioning as a young person. And that is before any of this anti-trans bills, anti-trans legislation was even, being passed or being talked about or in the political discourse whatsoever. And so in that way, to think that there is a kid out there who felt the same exact way that I felt and is completely unable to receive that care, actually like disturbs me. And I think that there's a lot of misconceptions about being trans, and unfortunately there aren't enough trans people who are in these court hearings at these representing our community and representing themselves. So it's unfortunately it kind of feels like it's up to people who have no idea what it's like to be trans, have no idea how to treat transgender people both medically and in a societal way, because you see that with these bills, because these bills they're not just prohibiting healthcare for trans kids, they're also prohibiting trans kids from participating in athletics at school, not on a professional level, at school. And just to think that prejudice is going to be solidified into law actually really terrifies me.
And do you have like a really kind of like intense memory of when you were able to get into that program of transitioning. Like, did your parents ever tell you like they noticed a difference in your demeanor or in your sustainability of wanting to be alive? Did you have a moment of like,
Well, luckily I sort of had the will to live, in the respect that I was very fortunate that I am unlike a lot of transgender people in the way that I had very, very high estrogen levels my whole life. So I was very lucky that my puberty was sort of like delayed regardless, and I didn't really develop a lot of secondary sex characteristics associated with men, just because like by the will of like God, or
entropy,
the God,
the randomness of
yeah, exactly,
life,
the randomness
of why
of
we even
life,
exist.
sort of made it a possibility for me to transition a little bit later. But I still have undergone surgeries to feminize myself, whether it's a breast augmentation or like lip filler or like whatever. I mean, I have done things to feminize myself out of dysphoria that perhaps I wouldn't have done had I transitioned younger.
I think about that a lot too.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that for people to try to legislate the right time for somebody to transition is crazy, because I knew I was a woman. I knew I was a girl from the time that I even could perceive gender.
Same here.
Yeah.
It was like a matter of fact. It wasn't even a question. It wasn't even like, am I a boy or girl? It was like, no, I'm a girl.
Yeah.
And then when I started getting the repercussions of saying that, I realized, oh shoot, I kind of felt like a spy or some sort, like that I was
in disguise.
Yeah, like, everybody thinks I'm a boy, but I'm really a girl.
Yeah.
Like, this is kind of how I went through life.
Definitely. And I mean, before I had any explanation for what I was, my family was pretty religious, so it would just sort of be like, pray to God. Like, yeah. God, like if you just pray hard enough, God will transform you into a woman. And then when God wasn't answering my prayers, and this was becoming a legitimate and very serious issue, luckily I had a family that was willing to take matters into their own hands, because my mom, bless her, knew that me navigating society looking like a man in a dress, I'm not saying that in a derogatory way. I'm just saying that she understood. Yeah, exactly. She understood that it would be easier for me to exist in society with the ability to pass
and to be seen as who you are,
and to be seen as who I am,
and not be misunderstood,
and not have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on corrective surgery. Like, surgery is incredibly expensive.
And then the desperation that you have to have these surgeries in turn kind of assimilates you almost to sex trafficking of doing sex work for these surgeries too.
Yeah, absolutely. Because first of all, trans people face workplace discrimination, housing discrimination, educational discrimination, medical discrimination. So we're discriminated against in all respects. And so like a lot of trans people who are unable to get jobs, who don't come from supportive families, who don't come from families that can afford to help these young people transition, they turn to, if you can't get hired, what are you going to do to make money? Especially when you need especially when you don't just need to pay rent and feed yourself. You need to come up with $100,000 to transform your entire body. So a lot of trans people turn to sex work, which is like very dangerous. I mean, I understand that there's like a glamorization going on with it right now, and that's sort of like its own that's a conversation for another day. But
it's also evolving, like sex work.
I know. Yeah. But there is no reason why somebody should have to turn to sleeping with strangers for money to be able to live the way that they want to live, because there's no other way for them to come up with that money, or there's no other resources for them. And so, this is a big part of the conversation, because it's sort of like, well, why should our government have to pay for trans surgeries? Why should the government or anybody be involved in this? And it's very complicated and nuanced.
But the irony is, like, the weird thing is, in these desperation times with these sex workers, their sponsors, their clients are predominantly cis, white, heterosexual, conservative, usually Republican men.
Yes, absolutely.
That's the it's almost like they want to keep us there in that position for them in secret.
Yeah. It's It's
I
really
don't know. It's weird.
despicable.
It just makes me. It just doesn't make. None of it makes sense.
None of it makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, it's like, the people who are pushing these bills are conservatives. And conservatives, all they do is talk about limited government. But it's only limited government when it comes to the point where it comes to legislating people's bodies, whether it's legislating women's reproductive rights, whether they want the right to choose to have a child or not, family planning, or whether it's a trans person who wants a younger trans person who wants to receive medical care. But somebody who has schizophrenia, why is somebody who has any other psychological condition able to receive that medical care when they are diagnosed with it, but why aren't trans people?
Yeah,
And it's because of prejudice.
and also keep in mind, a lot of times when they diagnose you with these things, they're not doing medical tests to check your genetics to see where this is occurring. They diagnose you by your symptoms,
Yeah.
and then they literally prescribe you medication
Yeah.
to treat these symptoms. So even so, because a lot of the argument is like, well, we can't find the biological evidence that you exist when we're existing right in front of you. Like they want this type of medicine that doesn't even exist yet of how to tell someone's trans. Yet, we're giving you our symptoms. They don't want to treat us, but then they're treating people with
for
yeah.
for other mental health conditions. And I understand that there is this whole sort of dialogue around whether being transgender is a mental illness or where it lies sort of in the scale. But let's just say we are, being transgender is a beautiful, incredible experience. But it is also
manifestation.
Yeah, exactly. But it's also very, very challenging. And if I could have avoided some of the challenges as a young person, I totally would have. And also, to these conservative people, when people question the legitimacy of trans people, there are over 7 billion human beings on Earth, and we have seen every sort of genetic variant possible because now it's all on the internet and people take pictures.
Yes.
And and these things nobody questions the legitimacy of those things, but for whatever reason, being trans is somehow questioned. It's like, you really think that out of those over 7 billion people on Earth that they're in climbing, that there's absolutely nobody who feels like they have a psychological, physical misalignment between their gender? That's ludicrous to me. We are such a diverse, humans are so diverse. But also a lot of conservatives love this idea of purity in terms of whether it is moral purity or racial purity. This is just a Christian, a conservative mindset that is really terribly toxic and stopping society from progressing forward.
And using children as kind of like pawns for their what do you call it, their politics is it's disturbing.
It is disturbing that they're using children for their politics
as pawns.
Yeah.
I don't know, it's just it breaks my heart. It doesn't make sense how these policymakers are acting like they're so concerned with these children, but the way they're navigating it is so abusive. It's if you're really concerned with these children, why aren't you meeting with these parents?
Because they're not. They're not concerned. Let's be blunt about this.
They're basically telling these parents, well, what's also weird in Alabama is they're telling these parents, you don't know how to raise your child to make choices to sustain their liveliness, yet they're having teachers as with the Gestapos, the when Nazis, had secret police reporting any children that may have gender dysphoria to tell their parents. So which one is it? Do you want parents to be responsible for their children, or you don't? What is it?
Well, on that topic, let's talk about these anti-trans bills a little bit, because there are so many of them. There are so many of them. So this is just for prohibiting healthcare for trans youth. So what this essentially means, a lot of these bills have to do with, they're not going to persecute the child, but they are going to persecute the medical provider who is providing this medical care to children. So what they're doing is they're outlawing providing care for trans kids in regards to their transition, whether that's hormones, whether that's surgeries, whatever it may be.
I wonder if that includes therapy as well.
Yeah.
Because in therapy, when you do have therapy as a trans kid, you're kind of affirming your gender dysphoria as being quote unquote normal or a part of you, it's okay. Yeah. So I'm wondering if they're saying that you can't, I wonder if it's going to turn to conversion. therapy.
Well, they wish. They already tried that on gay people, and
I
how
know
did that work
I
out
know
for
how did
you?
that
Not very
work?
well, clearly. They, like conservatives did everything in their power to stop gay people from being treated as first, like normal citizens. They were treated like second class citizens by conservatives forever. And we'll get into a little bit of that for sure. But this is part of their agenda, because part of like the I use this word generally. Like I'm sure not all conservatives feel this way, but your spokespeople certainly do. And the message that they're sending through their actions and through their bills historically has been, in order for us to maintain power, we must oppress everybody else who is not just like us.
And, and what these laws are also doing is they're affirming bigotry as well, saying like it's okay to say that these people aren't trans.
Yeah, exactly. It's like by law we're allowed to discriminate against you now, but that's always been the case.
Yeah,
So
and just from experience for myself, I just want to say that I grew up a really gifted child. Like I just caught on to like math. They wanted to put me to these programs, and I was always questioned when was like exceptional, and that really traumatized me when it comes to like studying or even trusting like institutions of education. Like I don't know, the repercussions that these things are going to have are so like you can't take it back once all these traumas happen. Like
yeah,
it's embedded.
what they don't understand is that they're traumatizing kids for the rest of their lives, and they're forcing them to cope with a an issue that could be solved earlier on in adulthood. But let's talk a little bit
Yeah.
about these bills. So I want to run through some of the states that are passing these bills. So these are the bills specifically aimed at prohibiting health care for trans kids. So we have Alabama. In Alabama, there's Senate Bill 10 and House Bill 1. And Senate Bill 10 passed through the Senate. So this is probably most likely going to become law now. So if anybody is watching this, something that you can do is contact these representatives, especially if you're from Alabama. But
And I think they even have it noted as like an emergency. So usually bills like this take a couple months to go into effect, but this bill will take 30 days.
it is so insane. And also, so like the if you are caught providing medical care as a physician to a trans child, you can receive up to 10 years in prison or a $15,000 fine, which is fucking crazy.
And probably losing their license.
Yeah,
I would imagine.
probably
For doing a felony offense in your practice.
Yeah.
Years of practicing medicine in this particular subject, and the government's gonna tell them like to contradict their degrees and to take it away their practice. It's just weird.
It is crazy. So there's Alabama is passing these laws, Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Kansas, Kentucky, Mississippi, Montana, Missouri, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, and West Virginia. So that's a lot of states. Prominent, all conservative, might I add. And now, if I will flip my notebook to the other side, because there are a lot of these bills. These bills have to do with excluding trans youth from participating in sports. And we're not talking about participating in the Olympics, participating in, professional competition. We're talking about like 12-year-olds kicking the soccer ball around. Like that's what this is prohibiting. Alabama, Arizona, Connecticut, which is a pretty liberal state, Florida, Georgia, Kansas, Kentucky, Montana, Missouri, New Hampshire, North Dakota, Oklahoma, South Carolina, South Dakota, Texas, Utah, West Virginia, Tennessee. I mean, there are just so many states. So there are 25 states. That's 50% of the country that is trying to pass these anti-trans bills. So I guess, and so just to discuss some of these solutions, like the solutions at the moment, if you live in those states and you are a trans person who has undergone trans care in a positive way, I imagine, as a young person, reach out to like the ACLU or the Human Rights Council, find a way to get involved, because we have to protect trans kids.
And also right now in the media, we're not really seeing these trans kids being represented from like a close family member. Like you're just I feel like I'm just hearing a lot from these politicians.
Yeah.
And I think
It's
it's important to speak up now and not feel embarrassed, because that's another thing is a lot of people, a lot of these trans kids wanted probably a seamless transition of normalcy and probably not having their tea spilled,
yeah,
you know?
people
Because I have a relative that's a young trans girl, and I don't want to really disclose who she is because it's as herself as an adult, she's gonna have to decide on her terms how she, you know, explains or who she wants to explain that she's trans to. So
yeah.
that's another kind of like,
Well,
I don't know.
a lot of what this has to do too as well is like outing trans people,
Yes.
because you know, it's just another way of dehumanizing them and rejecting the gender that they are by saying, okay, this person is not a woman. This person is not a
Or
man.
this person
They
doing
are
a flamer.
yeah,
I
exactly.
think
Like
I think this one probably wears their mother's heels in the closet. You know what
yeah,
I mean?
exactly. So it's a way of
So it's even
outing
targeting. Yeah,
people
it's
and
even
targeting these
it can
people.
even like people. Somebody who's cis and gay may even be targeted and reported
Yeah.
as possibly
Well,
trans.
here's one of the laws in
Or
Alabama
even
actually.
the whole women's basketball team might be
Yeah, I mean,
as being. I don't know. It's
well, let's
insane.
one of the interesting things about the bill in Alabama act one of the bills in Alabama actually has to do with the responsibility of the educational professional to out any child to their parents that may seem to be exhibiting
Gender variance.
gender variance, which is crazy
It's
because you don't know if
insane.
these kids come from a incredibly homophobic family where, you know, something like that could be incredibly damaging.
Or like when they're at school, they like to put their hair down. You know what I mean? They may not be trans, but maybe flamboyant or whatever. I don't
Whatever.
know.
So
It's just
yeah, if somebody is
school may be their safe
expressing
space.
their gender identity in a more fluid way and may not be trans and might just be gay or might just have like an interesting creative point of view in the way that they dress,
Uh-huh.
you're going to out those kids now to their parents because you might suspect they might be a tranny like when they grow up or something. It's like so ridiculous. Like these people are insane. But of course, this has been going on for a very, very long time. In the from the 1840s to the 1940s, there were the masquerade laws, aka the 3 articles laws, which meant that you could be thrown in prison unless you were wearing at least 3 articles of clothing from the gender that you were assigned at birth. So they've been imprisoning trans people forever. And actually, you know, this one of the things that I've learned, you know, a great resource for learning about sort of the history of gender is actually Alok Vmenon.
Intelligent, super
Yeah,
articulate with how they express themselves. A beautiful soul, I would say.
definitely, I would agree. Like this person is a beautiful soul, and they do an incredible job at sort of explaining the history of of being trans and how it's been outlawed and criminalized. Um, and you know, these laws back in the day, it used to be considered female impersonation if you were trans, so you were thrown in prison as a female impersonator, which is like
So whole
so
RuPaul's
crazy.
Drag Race would be in prison right now.
And then also what they would do is they would put these people's names in the paper with a photo of themselves.
Yes.
So not just in a way, like they were intentionally publicly shaming trans people and trying to
And
prevent them from living their true identities or expressing their gender
and
identity
making
anywhere.
them targets as well.
Yeah, and also like an interesting thing about that particular law it was actually used to control. It was used as a method to control women because at the time, women only wore dresses and men wore pants, and
And they
pants were
weren't allowed
seen
to
as like
go
a
out.
sign of mobility. They were seen as a
Yeah.
sign of like ableness to be able to, you know, work and provide, and women wearing dresses was sort of like a way of relegating them to the home. So, you know, sort of they did this in a way to sort of like make it
Or like, where's your escort, madame? What are you doing at this hour without an escort? You know what I mean? So they
yeah.
would probably wear pants to, to go to the store and get some, I don't know, cigarettes or eggs or milk or whatever they needed for the house.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, it's
And
just
they
crazy.
yeah.
So, you know, really like something that Alok does a great job of touching on is
Mhm.
sort of how these gender laws aren't just necessarily affecting trans people, they're also affecting like women as well, and historically they have. And it's a way of policing gender, and it's a way of saying this is normal, this is societally acceptable, and if you're not going to conform, we're going to punish you publicly, and ridicule you publicly. And this anti people who a great thing that Alok also does talk about is sort of like historically, trans people have been around forever, like
Forever, the beginning of
forever.
time.
Um, you know, from ancient history up until a couple hundred years ago, there are examples of transgender individuals existing, and they were celebrated in many of these cultures. And then, of course, like Western conservative white European culture comes in and colonizes all of these places and implements their
Demonizes them as well with their own religious views
yeah, and
of white supremacy.
exactly, and implements these laws onto these places that they've colonized. And so for the past, since this massive colonization of the world by white people, essentially, they've imprinted what they find to be normal and acceptable on these societies as well, and that's had a huge effect as well, on the way trans people have been perceived in the world, not just in the United States. But today we're kind of focusing more on the United States because we live here. We're American bitches.
In LA at the moment.
Definitely. So like let's unpack some of these issues. So let's we sort of talked about why it would be important for a trans child to receive medical care at a young age. Let's talk about trans kids in athletics now, because I think that this is a little bit more of a nuanced conversation, and I do understand and see kind of both sides of this issue.
Yeah, I think discussing, well, ALOC is non-binary. I think there is kind of a repercussion of the wording and language in bridging understanding to people that are cis-binary. I think there's a lot of confusion in that as well between what it is to be trans-binary and non-binary. And I think just like the word, the umbrella, it, it in effect, I think, trickles down to this confusion that trickles down to these trans kids as well. I
Yeah,
think. That's
absolutely.
kind of like what, like, I think this kind of like, like this is confusing. It's not even only just Republicans, but I'm noticing also kind of like people who identify or vote Democrat or consider themselves liberal or even question themselves. They're like, wait, this is kind of, so they're not forming any really opinions because they don't really understand.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
For
And
sure.
now
We'll
binary,
talk
yeah.
about that in a second.
But
But
these
just in
kids,
terms of like trans athletics, these kids not being able to access athletics as trans children. Like I just want to focus that on a second before
but what
we
do you
move
think
on.
about like a kid that identifies as being a trans kid but doesn't go through HRT, hormone replacement therapy?
Yeah.
Do you think that's fair, even though it's not?
I mean, let's be
Because when
honest.
you're in high school and you're playing a sport, it's like everything. You think high school is the epitome of like, well, for me, when I grew up, it was
Yeah.
like everything. You didn't really know that you were going to forget most of the people you went to school with.
I think that like the standards should be dictated by medical professionals and not by people like Joe Rogan. What qualifications does somebody like Joe Rogan, who has advocated for the passing of this sort of legislation for a long time now, like what qualifications does he have other than he's talking to people who clearly have some biases against trans people? But like hear me out for a second. Like trans kids are just like any other kids, and the athletic ability of a 14-year-old is, probably not so significant that they're going to end up in the Olympics or end up in a college team. I mean, like the people who pursue sports into adulthood, it's not a lot of people. Everybody is required to take sports. So this idea that like, little Jenny is going to lose her scholarship because she lost out to, some trans kid is pretty ludicrous. I think that there are a lot of people bring up like a lot of evidence and anecdotal evidence of these kids winning, but really, how many transgender kids are there that want to pursue anything in sports whatsoever? When I was like a little trans kid, I could give two fucks about
Well,
doing anything sporty.
I did participate in track and field. I did the short long distance, which was the worst one to choose in track and field because it's like it's not short and it's not long. It's like a mile but at high speed. And it was like I was so scrawny and like I was so bony. I remember I was like running. It was so traumatic. My legs were like spaghetti and I was just like
Yeah.
and I remember I got most what is it most what do you call it when you most what's that word? Like when you are most improved. I was most improved. And then they wanted me to come back again next year. I was like, oh, no, thank you. I was like, that was so traumatized. I mean, what I loved about the sport itself is it gave you a sense of teamwork.
Yes.
And kind of like,
that's like what,
that's
like,
the important thing is like, well, you really learn inclusiveness and what it's like to like bond with other people.
Absolutely. Like there is something to be said about the way that sportsmanship influences, like that's why it's taught in school essentially, is because not just being athletic is not just healthy for you in general, it's also a great way of teaching people teamwork exercises, building relationships amongst your peers. I mean, like there are a lot of benefits to sports, and somebody just like slammed their door. I was freaked out. I was like, I hope nobody's like knocking on my door or something. Yeah, there are a lot of incredible benefits to participating in athletics as a young person. And why are we going to deny somebody that because they're different? We don't deny that to kids who have other disabilities.
But I think even so, like even
not that being trans is a disability.
Yeah, like say we just start embarking this, right? We just let them play, right? And we start noticing, oh my God, trans kids are really outbeating, like trans girls are really outbeating these cis girls. So even then, you can get creative and be like, okay, why don't we have like where each school has representation of their trans kids and put them against other kids, more like a county or like a state, have them still participate, but you get what I'm saying? Like just to have that participation and that team spirit.
Yeah.
Like they can get creative if this doesn't work out, but just banning them all together.
Yeah, it's not fair.
Yeah,
it's not fair, and it's also
and
like
it's not loving or empathetic or compassionate at all.
Yeah, which is fine. I mean, it's not fine. It's fucked, but I can understand how, we want sportsmanship to be as fair and equitable as possible. And the reason why we do that is that's why we separate genders, because obviously women have completely different bodies from men and different athletic abilities from men. And of course, that's something that has to be respected. That being said, there are women who naturally have very high testosterone, who are incredible athletes, who are better athletes, in fact, than some men. And, I will give Joe Rogan, for example, the grace of his sort of embarking on his crusade against trans athletes. Started with a trans woman who was a fighter, and she wasn't disclosing her trans identity, but still fighting women, and she was demolishing them. But she transitioned way later in life. She had testosterone coursing through her veins for a very long time, and professionally competing as a trans person is totally different, and that's a completely different conversation than just letting some kid play dodgeball in school. It's crazy.
That's messed up though. Like that's kind of like unfair. But
that's definitely
that's a very
unfair.
particular example. Like
that's anecdotal evidence.
Yes, it's not like it really tells a story or describes a picture.
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, like that's sort of my 2 cents on that. Is like I couldn't find when I was doing my research, I couldn't find many examples of trans athletes being completely winning all of the time against girls or against boys, but really like this is targeting like trans girls.
Yeah, well, there's not enough data because they really haven't let trans kids participate to even have that data available.
Yeah, exactly.
Just assumptions.
Yeah, exactly. It's just an assumption. So, I mean, while this particular issue is more nuanced, just the idea of like taking kids out of athletics in school or athletics in their free time because it might prevent somebody else from excelling is so sort of silly. And I think that, Bill Maher adequately puts that these are boutique issues.
Yeah, I was gonna say these are community issues too that community should be dealing with.
Yeah, but
and kind of
also
navigating and like
yeah, but it's like trans issues in general are boutique issues. The fact that like there are so many people who are obsessing over trans people in public discourse is so fucking bizarre to me because it's like who gives a shit? Like trans people make up less than 1% of the population.
I think it's like 1.4 million of us, and how many people are in the United States? 100 million, 200 million?
No, like over like 350 million
350,
people.
yeah, so it's like
I think over
they're
what
so
350 million
obsessed
people.
with us. Oh my
I know,
God,
but
you're
it's
obsessed
easy
with
to be
me.
obsessed with us because
I know you want
oftentimes
me,
trans
but-
people are not the best spokespeople for themselves at times. A lot of trans activists do not speak on the behalf of binary trans people. And let's be real, these laws are targeting binary trans
Yeah.
people because
They're the ones-
non-binary trans people, while some of them may have the desire to transition and undergo medical treatment at some point, the majority of non-binary people who identify as trans, which like is a non-binary identifying as trans is a conversation when it's within itself, but a lot of those people have no desire to undergo hormone replacement therapy, have no desire to undergo surgeries to physically change their appearance to assimilate into a binary society. I mean, and there's nothing wrong with that, but a lot of these people are speaking on behalf and representing themselves to be trans. And I think that's where waters get a little bit muddy here.
But
We're going to tread lightly on this topic, by the way. So please do not whatever. We're just two bitches talking about this,
talking and having
and
drinks,
we're just having a conversation.
spilling
And
our
so
hearts out
please don't
authentically.
please understand before you cancel us that we are just
Don't
we are just expressing the way that we feel about these issues as two binary trans people.
Have
and
a soul, have a heart.
have a heart, and also learn that
imperfect.
we're trying to learn and we're trying to
We look
understand.
perfect, but we're not.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I don't know.
what is your take on sort of the non-binary versus
Well,
trans?
the Equality Act, what struck out to me was the wording where it says you cannot discriminate with somebody's gender identity. So it's kind of like leaves a loophole of paranoia that somebody who, I don't know, it's just randomly, it's possible. I mean, it's not that it's happening, but I can kind of see where their paranoia is. Somebody could say, oh, I'm a woman, and not go through HRT and just be this yoked dude who's just doing it for a year. This is like a Disney movie or something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like dressing as a woman and starts playing women's sports and goes to the championships. Like, I mean, it sounds like a movie, but this is like, I feel like the paranoia that these people have with that wording in
Yes,
particular.
but that's the same paranoia that was used against people when all the trans bathroom stuff was going on. That
Yeah.
it's like, well, now just anybody can identify however they want, and they can use whatever
Yeah.
bathroom that they want, and that one of those people is probably going to be a predator.
And you know what's funny? I was
And
thinking,
like
I think
there's
we would have more
also
fun-
there's no evidence of this either. There's like barely any evidence, and the evidence that there is
But I-
completely anecdotal as well for the bathroom issue.
But I think likely if you went into the men's restroom, it'd be more fun than terrifying if you're into that. If the guys are cute, like
if I went into the men's bathroom,
be
you don't
kinda-
want me walking up to the urinal, honey.
I
Mm-mm.
know, like it's gonna be
Yeah, but I think
the sexual tension will be high. You know, just
I mean, it would just be weird in general, like whatever. Like people should be able to use the bathroom in which they identify as and look as. And I'm sorry, like if you look like a man and there's no gender neutral bathroom there, just use the men's bathroom. If you look like a woman and there's no gender neutral bathroom available to you, just use the women's restroom.
choose
You know what
your
I mean?
battles wisely.
Choose your battles
Like, is it
wisely, which is
really
trans
worth
people
it?
are terrible at choosing their battles
Yeah,
wisely.
Like, come on, there's other battles that are worth fighting for. Like just
Yeah.
go, do your business, and get out. At the
Yeah.
end of the day.
So
Safely in peace. Like,
Yeah.
just bite your tongue. Be like, ugh, cis normative bullshit, and just use the bathroom and then leave.
yeah, exactly. And I understand that a lot of trans people want to change the world and want to make society a more utopic beautiful, accepting place, and I am all for that. But unfortunately,
We're not there
we're
yet.
not there yet.
We will
And
get there, I believe. Maybe
yeah,
in 100 years.
can we walk before we run,
Yeah.
please? And I'm not
Can we
saying
tread
that to
lightly?
to discourage anybody from participating in the activism that they feel is important or whatever. I'm only saying this
Can
because
we like not bulldoze so hard so we don't have repercussions like this where
absolutely. And also the priorities of trans people are
yeah.
completely like the issues that, populate the trans or, the issues that are popular in the trans discourse are oftentimes such surface level bullshit issues. And the issues that the trans community needs to be focusing on are issues like the ones that are going to legislatively affect us and target
all
us.
the 100% population of binary trans kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like it's not like a percentage or some of them, or maybe they're non-binary. No, it's like it's targeting.
Yeah, I think that a lot of time, I think that right now, let's be real, like these laws are targeting binary trans women for the most part. And I find it personally sometimes upsets me, and I find it discouraging when there are people who will never have to live a day in their lives as a binary trans person who wants to just walk around and assimilate into society, perhaps a non-binary person, it might be who won't experience those things that we will experience, speaking on our behalf about these issues because they really just don't know. And later I'll read a testimony from a girl who started and lived her life as non-binary for a few years and then transitioned. And she talks about the complete and total difference that she experienced between living as non-binary versus living as trans. But the one thing I will say, the biggest difference is a non-binary person has the ability to sort of like shape shift their gender more than a trans person does. Like a binary trans person, they can't just remove their breast augmentation and remove their nose job or whatever, like whatever plastic surgery that they've had, so that they can show up someplace and just sort of fit in for a second. Like once you are started to transition, and you've taken medical steps to do that, like you are stuck like that forever. And so,
I mean, there are detransitioners.
There are a select few
Yeah,
detransitioners. That's not that popular. There are not that many people who are detransitioning, but I think that
it's a commitment that when you do it, it's like forever. It's like life altering. Like that's who you are.
Absolutely. And I think that's part of that's part of the fear that is being stormed up about young trans kids transitioning, because there's this idea that a lot of these kids are going to regret this. A lot of these kids are going to want to change back. And if a lot of these kids, if they had the proper medical guidance through these issues, that wouldn't be an issue. So if anything, like we need to apply more, not less, medical care for trans people to make sure that the right people who feel the right way and are being diagnosed properly, so those people aren't going to
like I don't even think there's even enough data to even conclude like what to do, like the best decision to make. I think we're still kind of like learning in itself.
We're navigating that.
Yeah.
So like before we start legislating trans people, can we at least do the research?
And can I also point out, regardless, like if the kid says they're trans and they want to transition and you don't let them and they go through life into adulthood, regardless, they're going to have some kind of trauma from that, like if they transition or not. Do you get what I'm saying? Like
absolutely.
To say that like, oh, we're saving them if we don't let them transition. They're still going to be battling something regardless. Like they're still going to be going into adulthood of not feeling kind of like quote unquote normal or common,
adequate.
And not only that, but now they're going to have to be policed and reported by their teachers now.
I know. It's just so
none
crazy.
Of it makes sense.
It is
it's like
crazy.
What really is the motive here? Like
what really is the motive?
Yes.
For sure. And I also think that like, I mean,
like
a lot of these kids who are detransitioning, this is kind of the issue where this is where things get complicated, because sort of this non-binary movement, which in my opinion is more a
like a fourth gender. Fourth expression,
a third gender expression, which is totally fine, and these people should be accepted for who they are, and they deserve the same rights and deserve to be treated like anybody else. I think
Beautiful minds too, by the way,
yes,
of how
definitely
they perceive
non-binary people
life.
are really incredible intellects and sort of like are able to see past a lot of the bullshit
Yeah.
that people who
Of
are binary,
possibilities.
yeah, the
Yeah.
possibilities, which is an incredible thing and that's great. But I think like the idea that there is a trans umbrella and people who are non-binary or and express themselves to be non-binary, that is somehow one and the same as being
It's
trans is just
not.
it's just plain wrong.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot of the confusion that's happening too. Like when
Absolutely.
I tell somebody I'm trans, they're like it's like an indicator of like, oh, I also like non-bi. Like it's just weird. Like they don't really understand who I am. Like it's so mixed up. Like they start picturing like if my well, one of my ex-boyfriends told one of his friends that he had a trans girlfriend, and they were asking like they thought that like I was gonna be like not how I am, like binary, because they've seen images of people like Alok or other non-binary people referring themselves as trans. So it's actually misidentifying these people who are actually attracted to us too. Because the whole point of gender, like expression, let's be real, a lot of it is fucking. Or sorry, can I say that? Or
Yeah.
sex. It's for sex, basically. Like, what's the point? Like, women are not like. There's other things that are complicated about me, that I'm a complex person. But at the end of the day, like, what really does it matter? Like, what is really gender, anyways? Beyond, oh, do I want to fuck you? Maybe I don't. Let me go. Like, when you go into these apps, when you look for a gender, like what you're into, you're looking for a kind of like a smaller pool of people that are interested, that you're interested in. You know what I mean? And if somebody's attracted to me in my binary transness, how are you going to place somebody that they would never stick their dick in or want anything to do with them into my category? Like, how are you? We're literally mis there's just a lot of like misidentification to
Well,
other people.
that's the funny thing about people identifying as both trans and non-binary is that they don't understand and they can't, I guess they don't understand or see the hypocrisy in it, because
Yeah.
if you are non-binary, that is you choosing not to associate with one gender or
Kind
the
of like
other,
a misfit.
but transgender means you're transitioning from one binary gender to the other. So to call yourself both non-binary and trans is sort of a misnomer, because they are separated in that way. And this is, I think, the fear that non-binary people have is that trans people are going to leave them in the dust. And I want non-binary people to understand that that is absolutely not true.
Not
We are
true at
not going
all.
to leave
Mm-mm.
we're not going to leave them in the dust. We're not going to leave them hanging. Just the
You're
LGBTQ flag is a very, very, very big flag. And we as a society, and we as a community have a responsibility to other community members, regardless of their experience. I'm transgender. I have no idea what it's like to be a gay man. I have no idea what it's like to be a lesbian or a bisexual person. I'm just not those things. However, I still advocate for their freedoms, their rights, and their equity. And trans people and non-binary people, we are different, and that is okay. And we are not going to leave non-binary people in the dust. And it's okay to just admit that we have these differences, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's okay that we feel differently about these things. And also, um like it's just
There's
it's
also an evolution there with binary trans women. Like
yeah.
like the pioneers that came before us that didn't have the opportunity to fulfill these dreams or to be treated for who they are, like I experience what it's like. I'm on the like it's almost like the monkeys, and they're kind of like they start standing up straight of like the evolution of mankind.
Oh yeah,
I feel
exactly.
like it's like in the beginning it was like those who were smuggling black market drugs, trying to transition like silicone, like like
Yeah.
in the 90s. And then it progressed to like transitioning late, maybe when you're 19, 20, or even 30. And then now you're watching the evolution literally, and it's watching children, and even you transition at 16, luckily, but even younger now.
Yeah.
Like it's just the evolution. Like are they even going to be, sometimes I ask myself, are they really ever trans if they never experienced any male puberty? Like if it's a seamless
Well,
transition
they're trans in the way that they were
to
born
be.
with, the
Yeah,
sex organs of the gender that they feel um
but the chemical
that doesn't
experience
reflect
of
their.
puberty, like because I went through a male puberty, and it was like horrifying. Like the dreams I used to dream
Yeah, it's
that I had
terrible.
boobs and a beard. A reoccurring nightmare that I used to have was like I was in limbo. Like as I felt like my hormones, the testosterone, it was like I was like, oh my god, like who am I? I would have this dream where I was had surgery and I was like, oh, I have like boobs, and I look in the mirror and I had a beard, and I would just start crying.
Yeah. I mean, just not feeling like you fit in the body that you were born in and feeling like society is going to judge you for that is incredibly traumatizing. Have been working through that trauma, well into adulthood, and I've sort of been able as a 26-year-old woman now to sort of face that head on in a more constructive, positive way.
Mm-hmm.
But it has been really, really challenging. And I've had to do a lot of work to convince other people of the legitimacy of my transness and the legitimacy of my gender. And that's really difficult and really hard. But back to sort of like the non-binary thing, I find that being non-binary is more of like a gender philosophy. It is the philosophy that gender exists on a spectrum, which is absolutely true. And some people are more in the middle of that spectrum, and many people are in the middle of that spectrum. But a lot of people who live within one binary or the other, there are a lot of people who have non-binary characteristics to them. You can be a straight cisgender male who likes to wear high heels, which would be a non-binary way of expressing your gender. That doesn't make them not male necessarily, or that doesn't leave them outside of the, like, it's just an abnormal characteristic that they're exhibiting of their life. But but if you exist in the middle, and you are non-binary, that's an amazing
Or
thing,
anywhere.
and that should be, or anywhere, that should be a celebrated thing.
I think the proper term would be like along the lines of mobilis, like mobile, like being here or there or anywhere, like moving at any moment in time. Like maybe today you want to, express yourself in more femme, and maybe you don't. Like it's kind of like you don't really. I feel like when you're non-binary, identify with either gender. It's kind of like, you don't, you're not your existence, your identity isn't gravitating towards the constructs that we are available. Because I think at the end of the day, personal identity, who we are as people, is a compilation of experiences and constructs that we all adopt. Like without constructs, there would no be bridging of understanding or meaning. Like constructs derived as a part of like survival and understanding of coexistence. And some people naturally gravitate towards binary for some reason. I mean, I don't know why. I asked myself like many times.
I think part of it is society, for sure. There's like society that says like if you are more binary in this way, it will be easier for you to sort of like exist within the 21st century society in which we live, but also it will be easier for you to find a partner. It will be easier for you to find a sexual mate. But that's not even necessarily true, because you look at people who definitely exhibited a lot of non-binary behaviors, such as a David Bowie, for example. And this guy was a sex symbol. You know what I mean? So like they're being androgynous.
Did he identify as a cis male, or we don't know?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
He identified as a cis male, but he
Gender
identified as
nonconforming.
he would be an example of gender nonconforming. And being gender nonconforming is something that everybody should accept. And if you give a fuck whether Harry Styles is wearing a dress on the cover of Vogue or not, or the feminization of men in society, like you have to like grow the fuck up. You have way too much time on your hands. Like that's another thing too. Like people like Candace Owens, who are sort of like saying like have this hashtag, this slogan, bring back manly men. Okay, like how are we defining manliness then? Yeah, bring back normal men. That's like really what that means. Harry Styles is a fucking rock star. He's getting his cock sucked by like probably a different gorgeous model every single night, and you're going to tell that man that he is like that by him wearing a dress, it's some sort of sin.
But I don't understand how it's affecting them anyway.
It's not affecting them.
If your partner exhibits things that you're not interested in, then they shouldn't be your partner. Like if you get what I mean, like if Harry Styles is not your partner or your love interest, and you're not sleeping with him, like what concern is it to you? Then don't sleep with him.
Yeah, don't sleep with him. Like
mind your business. That's
Yeah,
it.
absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
this is just we're at a weird point in society right now where it's sort of like um
Can I
men are
live?
able to express their identity, gender identity in a more fluid way, whether that's not them wearing earrings now or painting their nails. And of course, men have been doing those things for decades. I mean, just in terms of like, we're sort of coming to a place where it's like men have more freedom now than ever because of the LGBTQ, blah, 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 there's so many letters, because of the gay movement and the trans movement. Men are able to sort of express themselves more fluidly and openly than they ever have. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I think that's something that we should celebrate. We should
And the
celebrate.
toxic masculinity
Yeah,
movement,
yeah, we should celebrate creativity. We should celebrate people's
complexities,
diversity and the complexity
the
of
beautiful
existence.
complexities of possible individualism and what it means to be a human in existence, and to not have the mundane things of life. Like, would you want to have like everything be exactly perfect how you want it to be? I feel like it would be kind of boring life if there was no other things that were different than what you would know. Like if we just knew everything.
No, they want people. I think they want people to be different. They just want them to be treated as second class citizens. Like they don't. They
Beneath
don't.
them?
Yes, exactly. They people who are supremacists in any way,
It's
whether
like a
it's
natural
white
selection of
supremacist or
dominance.
yeah, exactly. Without those people to mock and to ridicule and to treat as second class citizens, then how are they going to feel powerful and how are they going to feel superior? And that's some bullshit. I mean, that's like really what
Some
this
value
is.
of importance. Yeah, you're
Yeah,
right.
it's dumb.
I know sometimes I feel like that's kind of like the repercussions of white colonialism, Western philosophy of individualism, and that kind of like tearing your claw just for yourself, like very egocentric perception, like not really sustainable for the
Narcissistic.
ecosystem, the biodiversity, conserving the biodiversity of the population. Like it's just so like egocentric and destructive.
Yeah, I mean, but conservatives have done this with every kind of person, whether it's like, you know, whether it's somebody who's Mexican who is trying to escape whatever crazy shit is going on in their country. And I say Mexican, but really what I meant to say is just any plain old immigrant, like
I'm
any.
Mexican, by the way.
Yeah, but
I grew up experiencing racism for being Mexican as well.
yeah,
On top
definitely.
of being trans.
But I mean,
Yeah.
that's a whole thing about supremacy as well. Is like these people are trying to, whether it is for your race, whether it is for your religion, whether it
But
is
that's
your
another
social
thing.
class or your gender.
That's another thing.
That they
though.
people in humans 50, I would say probably about 50% of humans enjoy the social hierarchy because without that they have nothing. If a white cisgender man is societally equal to a black transgender woman, like then where's the superiority complex that they've spent hundreds of years
Which is
building for
actually-
themselves?
which I think is actually an insecurity complex.
Of course it is.
Trying to like kind of narrow the competition down.
Yeah,
You know what I
definitely.
mean?
Because they don't like the idea that somebody who's different, that they could lose out to an opportunity to somebody who's different than them, which is really like what this is.
I'm not siding with anyone here, like in terms, because I kind of have empathy and understanding conservatives. I know that sounds kind of like you
No,
wanna
I do
scratch
too.
your eyes out. Ah!
People
But, like,
think I'm
imagine
like a
growing up-
crazy Trump
But
supporter
imagine,
conservative. I'm not.
imagine growing up religious, okay, and believing that God, like having that security blanket of religion in this fucking, we're all in the same boat, basically. We're all fucking pop out of here. We're like, no instructions. The instructions we have are a mess, a hot mess. So imagine like this sanctuary and how beautiful it is to have a Bible with the meaning of life. Like how comforting that is to people that don't really have the intellect or curiosity to understand life beyond that. Like in a way, it's like I kind of like my mom's religious, and sometimes I want to be like, well, but I'm like, I see the sanctuary and the calmness and love that it gives her. So I don't really like, who am I to tell her anything? You know what I mean? And I feel like to a point I can see where a lot of this hatred also can come from religious people, or because now they're threatened, like, okay, how does it say here that they're bad, but then this person's trans and they're good? Oh no, is it gonna like now we're kind of threatening their sustainability of their happiness in life of like, oh, maybe this Bible
Well,
isn't real.
if you're
I think that has to do with a lot of like the threat that they feel.
yeah, well, if the happiness and the equity of people who are different than you is a threat to you, that's a problem that you need to examine, and that's like
But
a
they
lot
don't
of
want
it.
to, so they
Of
use
course,
us
of
as the
course.
scapegoat.
But I mean, this I've said this before, but religion gives people a noble framework and of which to be prejudiced. I think I'm allowed to discriminate against you because it says so in the Bible, and if it's the word of God, therefore it must be true and it must be noble.
And can I say something like seriously? Okay, let's hypothetically say I'm baptized Mormon. Nobody in my family is Mormon, so I've embarked on a journey of spirituality because I'm I guess I'm curious and holy, I suppose.
You're unholy and curious as well.
No, but my point is like conceptualizing a God. Okay, let's hypothetically say God exists in the Bible. So technically, God is everywhere at the same time. So this entity of a God has a consciousness of a billion. It literally has a billion consciousness happening all at the same time. You know, not even conceptualizing time. Time doesn't exist. Okay, let's say we believe in God, and not only that, but also they don't die, and they can't die. So if you stab them or shank them or you can't hurt them no matter what you do. So their conceptualization of good and bad is not the same as us. So who are we to advocate for such an entity and speak on their behalf when we could barely think with one consciousness?
Well, it's also because, like, let's be real. I mean, people made up God. Like the reasons why humans give Jesus and God in the Bible a framework. I mean, of course, God.
Lay it down.
Here we go, people. We're really about to tackle this topic too. But for a lot of people, I had no idea that this trans conversation was going to spiral into a conversation about God. But for a lot,
that is a lot.
If you're using God to justify your prejudice against LGBTQ people, let me just say this to you. Like, I know this might be hard for you to say, hard for you to wrap your head around, but God in the religious context is a fictional character that has been created by societies to control their populations, and the way that they have done that for centuries has been through religion. And God has sort of been this vessel of population control in the way that they've created a book, and the book has morals, and the book has
philosophy, basically
philosophies, and it gives people a code of which to live by. And if you're living in a time where there aren't police officers running around with guns, I mean, and you want to control society, what do you tell them? You tell them if you don't follow this moral code, you're not only a sinner, you are also going to hell. And hell, to somebody who has no concept of the afterlife or the possibilities of the afterlife, is pretty scary to some people.
In their defense, maybe it was true, but if it was, it's tainted. Like, it was used and manipulated to like control people.
Yeah,
at the end of the day, like
that's like what religion still does.
So even if it is true, like even if there is this kind of thing, it's been warped. It's been tainted.
It's been tainted by people's perception of it, and by people's perception of what God wants. Like, you know what I mean?
God has left the building.
Yeah, God has left the building on this conversation. I'm not saying that I think religion is in some ways bad, but I don't think that the point of religion is to be bad. I think it's important for some people to have, a sense of community,
for a higher power or something beyond themselves, beyond their bodies.
I think so. I don't think religion is like inherently bad. I think people have used religion to manipulate society
and hurt people
and have used it to justify their prejudices,
contradicting love.
And it's like God is love and
compassionate and understanding.
Yeah. So should we talk about some sort of like internet trans topics now? Is there anything like you wanted to cover?
No, that was pretty good.
I feel like we covered a lot of ground in that conversation.
I think a lot of people are gonna it's gonna resonate with a lot of people, especially I get one sometimes in my rants on my posts. I get a lot of binary trans women that are like, thank you, or I didn't know how to articulate it, or
Yeah.
because a lot of times I think when people do go non-binary is because they don't know how to like articulate it. So in a way, it's like almost like a sign of defeat, or they just don't know how
Yeah.
to put it into words.
I want to
So I
actually,
think it's really important that we put it into words, as a bridge of understanding of our experience and how we feel, and how it makes us feel misrecognized when we're sharing a category with non-binary people that don't share the same experience of of what they're expressing, and not like literally. I Beyond like philosophy and science and stuff, I don't know how I would identify with somebody who's non-binary in a daily level.
yeah. I would like to actually read
Okay.
a friend of mine's statement that
Okay.
has to do with this non-binary issue. This is a binary trans woman who has existed and lived as both non-binary prior to transition and is now a binary trans woman. But there was a time where they were
Binary goddess.
a binary they them goddess. And so now I'm going to read their statement. Navigating the word, of course, I messed it up within the first like 3 seconds of reading it. My fucking dyslexia got me again. Navigating the world as a trans person, specifically as a binary trans woman, isn't something we get to slough off at the end of the day. We wear our struggle and flirt with violence and the oppression every day. And this anxiety we carry with us everywhere we go is a constant reminder that we are different. This very particular existence inherently stems from the fact that we have transgressed a norm that is so deeply rooted in society's collective unconscious. While any lived journey of gender divergence is valid, not all should be honored in the same regard that is garnered from daily authenticity. Trans is not a trend, and the sanctity bestowed upon the non-binary community, which often uses gender expression as trivial play, affects our lived experience at the cost of our rights, resources, and quality of our lives. This is kind of hard.
Makes me want to cry, but it's okay.
Um,
That really resonates. That's
yeah, I think a lot of that is true, and I think a lot of people are a
they're
lot of
not being
trans people
seen.
are very scared to have this conversation because first of all, trans people don't want to be canceled for speaking their truth, and because being canceled sucks. Secondly, I think that trans people want to be careful that they don't want non-binary people to feel invalidated. I think that
We
this
support them.
we absolutely
I support
100%
you, like,
support trans
but I want you to support me.
non-binary people. And yeah, continue with what you were saying. Excuse me for interrupting you.
No, you just keep flowing back and forth.
Yeah. I think that what she said is true. I think that a lot of times non-binary people, I said this a little bit earlier, non-binary people speaking on behalf of the trans experience, which they don't really have any experience in unless you were once non-binary and then transitioned to be binary trans. It comes at the cost of oftentimes the way that we are seen in society and the legitimacy of trans people, and trans women are targeted the most. And I believe this to be true. I think I said this earlier. I said it frustrates me and it sometimes disappoints me to see that the loudest voices in the trans community oftentimes are not transgender binary people, because the laws that are oftentimes being passed specifically target binary trans people. And so I think sort of like the way I would like to say this is, while non-binary people should be supportive of trans women and trans men who are binary.
And our space and our identity of space. Like,
yeah.
Like literally, we want the same thing that they want, but we want to share space with you, but in who we are, who we're expressing, how we want to be understood is not to be diluted with who you are. That's all we're asking. I'm not asking them
They're
to not
just
exist. Or
different.
that, yeah, it's just a different version of manifesting who you are beyond what your genitals say.
But I think in all respects, whether it's somebody that you're explaining what being trans to is about, or whether it's a lawmaker, like who you're trying to explain your identity to a lawmaker. I think that there are clear and succinct differences
They
between.
weaponize the confusion between binary trans women and
Yeah, yes, they
non-binary.
do. Like the unfortunate thing about
They use that against
they
us.
yes,
The misunderstanding
they
of
use the
it.
misunderstanding to delegitimize the legitimacy of binary trans individuals, because they sort of point to
It's
non-binary
kind of
people, which is which
backfiring.
is a legitimate thing to be non-binary. They point
Yes.
to non-binary people and they say like, okay, like how can we take this seriously if you're like accosting me for not using your pronouns, which is a conversation we should also have, or
Yeah.
like accosting me because for stupid basic things. I mean, it's
But I think in
okay,
general,
if
American
you're
society,
non-binary,
yeah.
like do your job in advocating for yourself and also being supportive and respectful of binary trans people's wishes. That's all I have to say on that
Think
issue.
of a new word. Try. I mean, I know this sounds like,
No, you can be non-binary,
okay,
but just
but I
just
just stop
but just
using stop mincing the word trans because it's being like. Think of another term. Just
yeah,
use non-binary.
it's
What's
kind
the
it's
big
kind
deal?
of it's
What's
kind
the
of
big
like
deal?
yeah, it's
Well,
kind of
who's really gonna lose anything? Like, if anything, I don't see any trans-binary person complaining about that if they see a non-binary just freaking identifying as non-binary and not trans. Like, I don't know how that's gonna change. The only thing that's gonna change is the people that are not actually transgender binary. So, but it doesn't make sense. Like, it's like just be non-binary and I'm trans. Period. That's a nice start into kind of like bridging an understanding of who we all are and how we want to be seen.
yeah,
Because
definitely.
right now,
And advocate for your own community and your
I
own
feel
freedom. But
totally like being robbed. I feel like, okay, here we go again. Now within them, like, now I'm in an umbrella that's like not even like, it makes me feel like less of who I actually am. Now it's like, and then one thing that I noticed, Alec used a term homophobic when, people are transphobic against people who are non-passing or whatever. But I was like, wait, he's like misgendering me saying it's homophobic. It's actually transphobic. Even if the sense that they're having these people, it's homophobic. Oh, that's a man, you're gay. But even that in itself of saying that, like having homophobia is transphobic in itself. Does that make sense?
I think I understand what you're saying by equating trans people with
Like, the word
with
homophobic shouldn't
with
even be used in that.
yeah, equating
Like,
gender with sexuality,
it's
and the truth is
it's not
gender and
understanding.
sexuality are totally different
Exactly.
things. Um, yeah, I
That's
mean,
one thing that
I
kind of
think we've
bothered me. I was like,
yeah,
oh,
so I
I felt
think
my heart get stabbed. I was like, oh.
I think I think to close out this conversation, I think what
Love,
we're trying to say
compassion,
is that yes,
understanding,
we have to be loving and compassionate and understanding.
open to listening to each other.
Yeah, we have to listen to each other, and we
Solutions.
are all part of the LGBTQ community, and we
Hell
all have a
yeah.
responsibility to uplift each
We're all
other.
fierce and they're all obsessed with us.
And but that being said, there are clear and succinct differences between a non-binary person and a binary trans person, and we need to respect those differences. And maybe I hope that people don't get offended by this, but allow binary trans people to speak on behalf of their own issues that are affecting them.
Amen.
And, we will allow non-binary people to speak on behalf of their issues.
Exactly.
And we just need to have that mutual respect. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with non-binary and trans being two totally different things that affect people in two totally different ways. And that's just something we have to respect. And we are going to move on now to talking about some other shit, because we've talked about non-binary people
We wanna
for a
talk
long
about-
ass time. But it's a conversation that a lot of
That's
trans people
important.
have in private that now I'm hoping we can have in a more public discourse. And like, obviously, like if you're going to try to cancel us, just know
Don't be
that we are
friends.
not professionals.
Don't
We are
cancel
we're just two trannies having a conversation over
Can I say
drinks.
that when I was hearing Alok talk, I was like, oh my God, I feel like I want to hug. I feel like we would be such good friends. Like the way they think and the way they see things. I'm like, oh, I just want to like sit under the stars, like a black sky, and just talk about like all this,
Yeah,
like,
non-binary people are beautiful, incredible, productive, members of society, and they deserve the same rights, treatments, and protections as not just only trans people, but also cisgender people. So I mean, that's just should go without saying. And almost every trans person I know agrees with that.
So what is on the
So what's on the docket? So one thing I want to talk about
super straight?
So yes, exactly. I literally was like, that is exactly
super straight. Oh my God.
I had to grab my jewel back for this conversation because I'm going to need a hit of nicotine to get through this one.
On my drive here, I was thinking about, super straight. Let's talk about super straight. Okay. Why is it a lot of men that are heterosexual, misogynistic, or treat women like shit? Like, I thought you're supposed to love women. Like, that doesn't seem very straight to me. How abusive they are towards women.
Let's first explain what super straight is. So super straight is sort of like this online sexuality that has been created in the TikTok sphere. And super straight sort of describes a heterosexual male that or a female that is attracted to the opposite sex just as long as they are not transgender. And a lot of trans people are really upset with this. That being said, I think while I disagree with Blair White on a number of issues, she did put this well, that like, how can you expect people, if you're creating a new sexuality like every day, as the LGBTQ community often does, how can we not respect this new sexuality as well? They're allowed to be like, here's the deal with super straight. Like,
take it serious.
Yeah, don't take it seriously. This is a perfect example.
So
this is a perfect example
super
of a
straight.
trap that like trans
And
people
the
fall
logo-
into.
and
Like
the
it is a
logo
booby
colors
trap.
are like reminds you of like a grinder logo.
Yeah, it's the same color as Grindr, which is so crazy. But it's this is an example of whether it's the pronoun conversation, whether it is other bullshit like super straight, or like calling somebody transphobic because they don't want to date a trans person. Like, if you're a trans person, I don't understand why you want to date somebody who's transphobic and doesn't want to date a trans person.
Or
like
doesn't understand or doesn't want to understand you.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have some confidence, girl. Like, you come from a lineage of powerful, strong bitches. Like
powerful, strong goddesses
who
and
rock, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
we walk these streets no matter what. Like, how are you gonna like care what some weenie says about you? Some like, you know what I mean? Like, why would you want somebody who's not confident enough or doesn't see the beauty in you? Like,
let these motherfuckers identify as super straight if they want to. Who gives a shit? If you're gonna allow people to identify as like pansexual and sapiosexual and trisexual or like whatever the fuck sexuality they are, if these people don't want to sleep with somebody who's trans or be with somebody who's trans, that is their prerogative, that is their preference. And we as a trans community need to move past that and just accept that some people are simply not going to want to fuck us or be with us simply for the fact that we are trans. It is not. Is it right?
That
no.
do want us. There's like
yeah.
A lot of
Also,
guys that do.
Here's the funny thing that
Who cares?
when I came out publicly as transgender, I genuinely believed that nobody was going to want to date me or
please,
fuck
honey.
me.
There's so many guys who love us.
And I have never had so much
So
sex in my
many.
life until after I came out. Like, and the guys that I'm pulling, I'm going to look directly into the camera for this one. The men that I pull are hot and hung and successful and Brazilian sometimes. Everybody loves the South American. They're great in bed. So, I mean, it's
That's
just,
the tea.
yeah, the tea is that, like, I think a lot of trans people fear that they are not going to be able to find a partner as long as this sort of transphobia exists. And I think that's not true. There are people that are comfortable enough in their masculinity and comfortable enough in their sexuality that they are willing to, and open-minded enough that they're willing to experiment, but allow people to do that at their own pace and their own time.
And if
That's
somebody
like
loves you, if it's real love, if it's love, they're going to compromise and they're going to want to be with you.
Absolutely. And
Even even like in the beginning of my transition, like I want to say a year, 2 years, like I met this like MIT genius, like portfolio manager. I was still like, what do they call it? Like clocky and like bricky. Like, you know know what I mean? Like, that's a man. I transitioned to New York and be like, that's a man, that's a man, that's a man. I would be like, I was like, oh my God, I'm like Britney Spears. Everybody's obsessed with me. But like, my point is like, I had this person who, you know, was like, wow, like that's the New York dream, you know, like, oh, the finance boyfriend. And here, we just kind of like had a bond. This is before the trans movement too.
Yeah.
And like, it was just so tight that he was like, he loved me and he like accepted me and we started a relationship. So there are men out there that will love you. Just focus on like who you are in your essence, you know, and that will roll off.
Definitely. Like sexiness and hotness and attraction is so much more than just the way that you look. It's or the gender that you were born into or whatever. I mean, being sexy and being attractive is like an essence. It's like the perfume of like your existence in a way.
And how sexy is it? Like, even like, you know, we date men, like when a guy is more confident in himself and like carries himself with that confidence.
Absolutely.
It adds a nice layer of icy
I find that like the men that I used to be like, I only used to date and sleep with straight men who had never been with a trans woman. And I was actually like, when I was younger, if somebody told me that they had a relationship or were sexually attracted to a trans person when I was younger, that it freaks me out and it kind of disgusted me. But that had to do with me being disgusted by myself.
Self-hatred.
It's self-hatred.
Believing in the self-hatred.
Yeah.
And I think that's also a problem in the trans community when they call somebody like they call them a tranny chaser. Oh, you're a chaser. But it's like you're literally
they're attracted to what they're attracted to you and
yeah,
what you're serving.
like,
why is that an issue?
Yeah,
Let them
you're literally contradicting yourself saying that they're disgusting for wanting someone like you. Like, how does like
yeah, that was a mental hurdle I had to overcome when I came out publicly, because then when I came out publicly I could no longer sort of like hide or beat around the bush that I was trans. It was literally like you Googled my name and the first thing that comes up is Teddy Quinlivan trans. And I came out in a super
that. Like that really added to my like confidence.
Aww.
And like changing and seeing like
well, I had to force myself to accept myself because I was not doing it on my own, and being in the closet was like a terrible, horrible experience. Looking back on it now, like being a closeted trans person
and a top
and
model
and hiding that from everybody. I hid it from everybody. I hid it from men I dated. I hid it from people I worked with. I hid it from some of my best friends. And holding that burden of hiding your true self and hiding such a big – it's not – being trans isn't my entire identity, but it's certainly a big piece of it.
And it was a privilege too in a way, wasn't it, kind of? Or no?
A privilege to what?
To like hide that, like to like not have to deal with that.
Like, it was nice in a way to walk around and be treated like a quote unquote normal girl in society. Like that was like in a way like nice and beneficial. But all of the secrecy and hiding and lying I had to do to maintain that anonymity and maintain that sort of like idea that I was born a cisgender woman was not worth it. And being out and proud feels so good. It feels so incredibly liberating. It was hard in the beginning. I'm not even gonna lie. Like it was hard, and it was hard. It was hard to, you know, be rejected for something I had absolutely no control over, and that hurt. But I reject guys for not having big enough dicks for me. So what the trans community needs to understand is that there are billions of people on this earth, and it's going to be a more challenging journey for you to find somebody, but you will, and it might not be the person that you imagine.
That strong confidence and beauty that you have, you know.
Yeah, well, you have to find it, bitch. Exactly. Find your confidence and find your beauty and believe in it, and
find those who have that same confidence.
Yeah, exactly.
And equal you. Like you're equals in confidence.
And if you feel like part of why you're being rejected is because of the way you look, like do yourself a favor and glow up. With all due respect, because you know if you are just physically unattractive to somebody, like they are just going to not be like. If you want to have a more larger volume of partners, work on yourself and work on your physical appearance to, you know, to gain more partners, because this is something cisgender people face too.
Yeah.
People who are considered unattractive have less partners. People who are considered attractive have more sexual partners and more romantic partners. So I mean, like, really, if you want to have more partners and a more larger volume of possibility, just work on your glow up. Human beings are superficial. It's not right. It's not okay. They shouldn't be, but it is how it is. And you just need to work on that glow up and like become the hot, sexy self you know that you are. And also just, I had to do a lot of work to realize that being trans myself was a beautiful thing. And so when I finally did that, and finally was confident being trans, that's when the boys started coming to me all of the time. It's like an air, like it's like as I was saying, it's like an essence, it's like a perfume, it's like the fragrance of existence. It was like,
yeah,
even though I was never, I've worked with Bella Hadid and Gigi and Kendall and all these girls, and I was never the most famous, most beautiful girl in the room ever, even though I was a top model. However, that essence, that fragrance
that fragrance
brought the boys to the yard.
That's tea smell.
The testosterone leaking from my orifices.
The tranny smell.
That good trans smell.
But don't you feel like the word tranny too is kind of a word that we can only use? Kind of how like,
yeah.
Do you mind, depending on the context, like of who your close friends are?
You can use. I feel like tranny is a word that like is been used against trans people, and so like therefore it is like, yeah, it's like it's for trans people, and like if you're just like a straight cisgender person throwing around the word tranny, I take issue with that. Whatever. Faggot is also our word.
Yeah.
So whatever.
I've used it many times.
I use it all the time. You know what? Those are our words that have been used against us for decades, and it's our right to reclaim them. So now, like, so people, like, I guess in closing, like, if you are going to have to find sexual partners that accept you for who you are, and I promise you the sex will be 10 times better. And you will feel better about having it. Yeah, those things will melt away when you're confident in yourself, and your partner's actually not just physically attracted to you, but just attracted to you as a person. Like your relationship and your experiences are going to be so much better. Oh, also, by the way, like, just bringing this up, I know how in my Violet Chachki episode I was talking about this amazing guy that I met.
Oh, yeah.
We dated for a while, and unfortunately it didn't work out. Just to let everyone know, I sadly had to dump this boy, but he's an incredible person, an incredible soul, and I'm so grateful that he, took interest in me and wanted to pursue a relationship with that. I had been like sort of floating the idea of dumping with him in some other subliminal ways.
Has he
for a very,
tried to
very
contact
long
you
time.
again, or did you have to block him?
No, luckily he hasn't tried to contact me again.
Oh,
So so that hasn't been an issue. He's a super respectful person, and I think he understands that. My feelings are legitimate, and
Did you break up in person or on the phone or text?
I sent him a text.
A text?
I sent him a text and and basically broke up with him in the text, and I said we should meet in person to just discuss this further, and so we did.
Mm-hmm.
And he was clearly upset, and then I got upset because he sort of like did a flip around with me, and he's like, yeah, this isn't working, when like actually it was my idea to dump this bitch. That was the most, if anything, that was the most frustrating thing, was that he sort of tried to make it seem like it was his idea.
You're right. Like, I've been thinking about
bitch, it was
too.
not your idea for me to dump you, like that you wanted to dump me. This was like
did it happen here, or?
Yeah, it happened in Los Angeles. Like, we took a trip together to New York, and I think like being in a different place, we took this, like, well, no, that was like where it sort of solidified the fact that I needed to break up with this boy, because we had such a beautiful emotional connection, but you kind of need the trifecta. You sort of need like the great sex, the great emotion, the looks, but also, which I guess he could be,
looking.
Yeah, he's really good looking. I only date hot guys, obviously. And this is a straight cisgender guy who had never seriously dated a trans girl before.
Has
and
he experimented with trans people?
I think he experimented with one trans person in his past, and he's an amazing person, but intellectually it was not a match, and also sexually it was could have been a match, but I wasn't willing to put in that much work to make it a match. Like, you know, when you're on a romantic vacation and you have absolutely no interest in sleeping with the person that you're on that vacation with, that's an
You
issue.
would recommend, but not highly recommend.
This, oh, you mean this guy? I highly recommend. He's an amazing person. I highly recommend him to somebody else. He was not right for me. He's an amazing person. He's a beautiful soul. He was incredibly supportive of me and my journey, and like the love I shared with him was an amazing thing. That being said, like I was always thinking about cheating on him because I wasn't getting sort of the things that I needed. You know, like I wasn't fulfilled sexually. I wasn't fulfilled intellectually, and I hate to, we were just talking about a million sexualities, but I would say I am a sapiosexual in the way that I need to have a deep intellectual connection with somebody who challenges my train of thought in order to be sexually attracted to them. Like if I don't respect somebody intellectually, there's no way I'm going to be able to fuck them and enjoy them.
Have you ever thought of dating a fixer upper?
I feel like I've done a lot of that. I feel like a lot of guys I take are, you know, I'm very good at taking
too confident.
Yeah, a blank. I'm really good at taking like a blank canvas, man, and
sometimes I get a little too confident though. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, put that microphone.
I feel like I'm being like molested. Okay.
So yeah, I don't know, like. Yeah, I find that like, if you want to win my heart, you better be smarter than me.
Yeah, I like that too. I like somebody that's kind of teach me something, kind of expand me. That was like super important for me. Like,
yeah,
I dated my boyfriend and that ended abruptly. I mean, we had like a lot of issues, like talking about my trauma. I felt like a lot of my traumatic triggerings affected, like still to this day was like affecting me. And I'm just like, what the fuck? But at the end of it, what really kind of like killed our relationship is when his dad found out that he was with had a trans girlfriend, and then he started kind of like investigating to see like his finances, and then once he saw that like like he spent a lot of money on me, that the dad's like, oh, she's using you for your money and all these things that were not even true. I was like literally in love with this guy. This was like a kind of guy that I would have never have thought of dating.
Was he a fixer-upper?
Well, I don't know, because like I feel like when you are in love with somebody, like I've never been in love like this. Like I've had boyfriends before that, where I wouldn't even want to suck his penis because it just looked like the pubic hairs. Like I just wasn't like, I wasn't excited.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, let's skip that part. Let's come down here, you know?
Yeah.
But I was so in love with him that I just wanted to be like, I would smell his crotch. Or like, can I talk about this?
Yeah,
like,
you can talk about this stuff. I mean, whatever.
Weird. Like, I kind of get disgusted by cum for some reason. I get kind of like, ooh.
Yeah, cum is kind of gross to me too. I mean, it's kind of gross to everybody. I mean, there are some people that like love cum, but like.
Yeah, but if he came, like, I would like lick it off his clothes, like try to get every microscopic.
You must have really loved him, girl.
I did. So like when the dad was like putting these things in his head and like kind of going against us, it was like really heartbreaking. And I think the thing that broke the camel's back was when the dad took him off of like the company board. Something that he was looking forward to. And that was really, I knew it was like, fuck, that's it. Like he's not gonna risk this.
Yeah, why? But also that's terrible on behalf of this is why you need to have autonomy from your parents, because like the people your parents should never have any influence over who you date. I mean, the same sort of, luckily with this.
But he was a trust fund kid, and I've never imagined. That's what I mean to say. I would never have dated him.
Oh my god, like I hate rich kids.
That's what I meant. Like somebody that would have never have dated. Imagine dating. Like to me, it's like they just don't like. They just have a different perspective of life.
Struggle.
Yeah, but our connection was like so beautiful. Like it was like something like astral.
Yeah,
you know? And like that. I'm just saying, like, when you meet somebody that you're just like when you're talking about those facets of compatibility, like how I would describe it are like protons and like electrons, and just kind of like creating this electromagnetic field, and just like everything is just so beautifully like just connected. Like it's just, where I
Yeah.
would lick his cum off his socks,
Oh my God,
I
you
just
sick,
noticed I
twisted
would want to
bitch.
like
What
smell
the
his.
fuck?
I would smell like it was. I just wanted to be so close to him. I would smell his feet. Like it was really weird, like stuff
Well,
that I
that's
have
like that's a
never done.
couples do that
And it
stuff.
and but
Like,
don't think that like if you're watching this and I like hook up with you, don't think I'm gonna do that for you. You know what I mean? Like it's just something that I just don't generally do.
well, sometimes you are so absolutely in love with somebody in their totality.
And that's a beautiful
Um,
experience. I'm
yeah,
grateful that I had that experience.
and
I'll
everybody
always
deserves
love him.
that.
He's such a beautiful human being, and like in this time in life, he wasn't wise enough, or maybe he just didn't feel the same. I don't know, but I wish him happiness, and he treated me with nothing but respect. He always like was super kind and thoughtful in his presence, and I'll always remember that, and I'm just really grateful that I got to experience that.
Yeah, and who's to say that you won't experience that again? I mean, like here's the thing about love people is like absolutely here's like just advice for anybody whether you're trans or not. Like don't fucking settle because settling like will eat you up inside. It gives you anxiety. It is like absolutely like the worst feeling when you like just compromise and settle for somebody, which is why I personally can never do that shit. Like I'm just not a settler. Like, and if somebody is not
I kind of
right
have a
for
fear
me,
of that too.
then they're just not right for
Getting
me.
bored
And
of
if that
somebody.
yeah, and if that means that I'm gonna be single forever, like so fucking be
Yeah.
it. Like I'd rather be single forever and be happy and have my autonomy and my freedom than be,
Because I'm so curious too. Like I've been so used to kind of going from guy to guy that I've learned so much from different guys. I'm like, oh my god, what if like I get bored of a guy after 3 or 5 years? I'm kind of scared of that. Like
everybody does.
low-key.
Cisgender people do.
Yeah, like oh my god, I'm ever gonna get tired
Yeah,
of him?
also trans girls and trans boys and non-binary folk who are listening to this, just realize that actually like love and dating is in the 21st century with dating apps and stuff
Ugh,
is so challenging
it's
for
hard because you're
everybody.
disposable. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, there's another one around the corner.
Yeah, but that's okay to be disposable because one day you're gonna find somebody who finds you indispensable.
Yes,
And
focus.
I hope to find that person who I think is indispensable to me. It's
Too.
been a struggle. It's very hard to win my heart over. I am picky as fuck.
Me too. It's a curse.
Yeah, for sure. But I sort of
Ugh.
I guess I would rather get that love from my friends than I would from one specific person. And, if I have sexual urges or like whatever, I can definitely find somebody from, whatever dark part of the internet to fill or Instagram or whatever to fill that void.
To
And
fill
by
that
void, I mean
crevice.
my hole.
Hole.
So,
I know. Well, I'm on a point where like after that breakup, I was kind of like, it was hard for me to be with other guys. Like it was like I cried on
yeah.
the first attempt. I was literally crying on the guy, like, and so it's been like so now I'm trying to transition into like, okay, I need to start having sex with guys for like fun and having pleasure and just like having, you know what I mean, just having intimacy with like
Yeah.
different people. And I've been having a hard time. It's been like I don't know, I get irritated when they open their mouth. I don't know.
There are a lot
I
of
like
guys
masturbating
who
and just,
are
not having the guy in front of me and just sleeping. But I need to like have sex because I feel like it's affecting me. Like I'm getting kind of like,
yeah.
I need, you know what I mean? It's
I
like,
get you. If I don't have like good sex,
need a
which is
penis.
partially why this past relationship failed. Like if I'm not able to have like fulfilling sex, I'm not. I literally can't function, and then like sex just becomes this thing that's like on my mind all of the time. And that's an issue for me. Like I don't want like my sexual urges to distract me from like doing the work at hand or like from, getting shit done and, whatever. Like people listening, love is fucking hard.
it is hard.
Yeah,
Ugh.
it's not
And then once you
easy.
have it and you think it's all good and it's all perfect, sometimes it just doesn't work out.
Yeah, Brad and Angelina Jolie broke
Oh,
up, and
yeah.
can you name two more attractive, perfect,
Ugh.
successful people in a union? Like, I don't think I can. You know what I mean? Like, love is fleeting for everybody, and just understand
Life is
that, like,
fleeting.
yeah, life is fleeting, love is fleeting, and to think that you're going to find one
Learn how to
person to
let
spend the
things
rest of your
go.
life with is like
It's
ludicrous.
possible.
It is okay. It's possible for
My
like
sister-
some people.
My sister has been with her husband since they were 14, 20 some years now.
whatever. So you know who has also been together for that long is Woody Allen and his adopted daughter. There's something really weird about like being in a relationship.
That's weird.
Yeah, did you know that thing about Woody Allen, how he like adopted
the Chinese orphan and like Mia Farrow.
With Mia Farrow, and then like when she turned 16 or something, she like he married her.
So they can,
so I mean, and they're still together. So I think like,
and here they're afraid
if your partner becomes a parental figure in your life, then that is sort of like where that like paternal maternal bond sinks in, and that's sort of like the whole premise of grooming is like you like sort of groom somebody to have that bond with you or whatever.
That is so weird. And here they're afraid of like gay people having children.
I know, you're scared of gay people. Like what the fuck is wrong with you people? Like you're scared of gay people adopting, you're scared of transgender kids
canceling Woody
you're scared of transgender kids like, you know, like participating in at school athletics or getting medical care. Y'all cisgender people have some real fucked up problems that you need to address first with your goddamn fucking pedophilia. And you're just cisgender people are way like equally, if not more fucked up than transgender people. So y'all need to work out your shit before you start legislating ours.
Exactly.
I feel like that's a good place to end.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to talk about?
Oh, this was a lot. It was intense. It was beautiful. It needed to be said.
It needed to be said.
Don't cancel us.
Don't cancel.
Don't attack me.
I mean, whatever. I find I'm
always gonna say mean things.
Yeah.
I feel like we could just like.
I feel like we did a pretty good job of like not being too mean, but also I want people to just understand that like, you know, this is a very nuanced, complicated conversation, and it's a conversation we should continue to have as a community. And we need to, exactly, and we need to continue to fight. So I just want to say before we sign off, I just want to give people some resources. So the ACLU website is a great place to stay up to date with transgender legislation, what the bills are, what they mean, if they're being passed, how close they are to being passed. So the ACLU is a great resource for that. Also, Chase Strangio. Chase Strangio. I'm sorry.
Strangio.
I'm going to link these people like in the description of the YouTube video. If you're listening, good luck, bitch. I'll try to link it in the description as well if I can remember. But Chase Strangio is an incredible trans lawyer who lobbies for trans rights, and he's a great resource as well. You know, Laverne Cox is a great resource. Laverne Cox oftentimes covers these issues and does it with really great poise and elegance, and she's an incredible person to pay attention to. Also, we mentioned Alok quite a bit. Alok is a non-binary individual, and they do such an amazing job sort of discussing like the history of trans issues, as well as sort of they're a great resource in terms of like gender philosophy and the applications of that. So these are all people and places that you should be paying attention to. Also, the Human Rights Council does a great job on behalf of trans and non-binary and LGBTQ individuals. So I think that's a great place to leave it.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Alexandra, for coming on.
Thank you for having me here. To me, you're like an icon of like this century. Like
you're so
sweet. Beyond you being like a top model and being trans, like you're so nostalgic for me of like the 90s era of like models and like their quick wit and their like just like matter of fact and just that energy. Because growing up like as a child, like ostracized, those were like that feminine energy was so fundamental into my like day to day, like giving me strength that like I'm really grateful that I have the chance to like be in your company.
Well, thank you so much. I feel grateful to be in the company of yours as well. And you know, I think if anything, I've just been true to myself throughout my whole life. And I think like if you want to carry yourself, no matter who you are, with the same energy that I have been able to manifest for myself, I think like the answer to that is just sort of like, do you be confident in who you are, love yourself, and that energy will follow. That's 90s supermodel cunty, opinionated, sassy energy will just come right through. It'll just the cunt will jump out. Thank you so much, Alexandria, for being here. That concludes this episode of Unholy and Curious. And until the next time, see you.